Greetings with lovers everywhere. I'm E-Train and welcome to E-Train Talks. And today we have an extremely special guest. This author is just amazing. And of course, I love shining a light on the amazing authors in the middle grade and young adult world. And today I'm just unbelievably thrilled to be speaking with an absolute storytelling legend of both of the age groups. She's sold over 26 million books worldwide. That's a lot. And she's been honored with countless awards, including the Andre Norton Award, and she's also a Newbery honoree. Not to mention, her writing has been translated into over 30 different languages. She's known for capturing the hearts of her readers with a unique blend of magic, darkness, and incredible attention to detail. She is really an icon in the young adult and middle grade fantasy world. Okay, if you've not guessed who I'm talking to by now, sitting across from me virtually today is the one and only #1 New York Times best-selling author, Holly Black. Thank you so much for joining me, Holly.
My goodness, thank you for that introduction. I don't know how I'm going to live up to it.
Oh, thank you. And I'm just so thrilled you're here because I absolutely love your stories. And now let's get into the first question.
Right,
So,
awesome.
let's start off with a question about the Iron Trial, which you co-wrote with Cassandra Clare. So, I love the fact that in your story, The Iron Trial, our protagonist Cal's father, Alistair Hunt, is actually trying to prevent his son from joining the Magisterium. He does everything possible, even going so far as telling his son to purposefully fail the trials. And I've read a lot of middle grade books where parents have tried to deny their kids magic, but the father in this book seems to be doing it for a different reason than most. Not really to be cruel or evil, to protect not him, the son, rather, but the world. So why did you decide to go in that direction for your story?
So, when we started working on these books, this was Cassie's first foray into middle grade. And we spent a lot of time talking about middle grade books that we both had loved. And, and there was one in particular that she brought up. It's Gordon Corman's I Want to Go Home! Exclamation point. This is, I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's a book about a kid who's sent to camp. He doesn't want to go to camp and he spends the whole book trying to go home. And she really she just remembered reading it and having it be like such a unusual position. And, we were coming into a situation where we knew there had been a lot of magic school books.
Mhm.
Obviously, Harry Potter loomed over all of them. And, there was even a question of like, can you still write magic school books at that time? And we were like, well, one thing that we want to do is really set things up differently so that, when people go into it, they have the sense of, okay, the pattern is different, even if we are, very, very familiar with magic school.
Mhm.
So we really wanted um, Cal to spend the beginning trying to flunk out of magic school, magic school tests in this case. Um, and we thought it'd be really funny for him to have things like have him do well by trying to do badly
Mhm.
and trying to come up with the like most ridiculous things he could do to flunk these tests and then the most ridiculous things that could happen as a result.
Well, that is such a great answer, and it's so true. In the Iron Trial, Callum, he just does everything in his power to be like, there's no way possible you can let me into this school because I'm failing these tests, amazingly failing them, like failing in a good way somehow. How are you gonna let me in this school? I'm like your worst recruit. And then poof, he's in, and we have a long, amazing story from there that we have that all of you have to read. So my next question for you is about the Folk of the Air series, which is a very popular YA fantasy story series right now, with intricate tales filled with many themes and subplots. And some of these are romance, betrayal, power, magic, and LGBTQ plus themes, just to name a few. So what inspired you to write this series? And did you know from the start that it would be a series?
I did, which is actually somewhat unusual for me. I have started many projects where I was like, it's just going to be one book, and then being like, okay, no, it's going to be 3 books, or it's going to be, but Cassie didn't let me do that with Iron Trial. She was like, we know exactly, we're going to plan it all 5 ahead of time. We're going to know what's in these books. But with the Book of the Air, I knew it was going to be a trilogy. I hadn't thought of The King of Elfhame, which is, sort of a novella and, a kind of, it's a separate story, but also it's a little bit of Carden's backstory. But I did know it would be 3. And I started with basically the prologue of the first book. Contains the premise for all of them. There are these 3 girls who are living in the human world. A guy comes to their door one day and claims to be the father of the eldest, and he is not human. He says that basically their mother ran off with their father, who are both human, but that that their mother is his wife, and things go bad, and he winds up killing both the mother and father and taking the 3 kids back to Elfhame with him. And so for Jude, who's the protagonist of that series, like, she's raised by, the murder of her parents, who also somehow becomes her dad, and in Fairy, and so everything kind of follows from that.
Mm-hmm. Now that is a very attention-grabbing premise. I mean, wow. Now I want to just dive into the Folk of the Air series even more than I already did, which is a whole lot. So, wowzers. I don't know how you write something as incredible as that.
Messed up, is that right?
That's the right way to put it, yeah. So, as someone who's written for both middle grade and YA, what do you feel are the major differences between the two? Is there like a certain boundary or content that separates middle grade from YA?
I think with middle grade, I think there's a lot about family and one's place in the family and one's identity in a family. Obviously there's a lot about friendship, but often, it is either that sort of early moving away into friendship, right? Or sometimes even first friendship. It's sort of the first moving out of the family, but also still a lot is centered, I think, on the family, and like how you fit into it, where you fit into it, what it means. Whereas I think of young adult as moving away from the family, often professionally to a certain extent, even though you're not necessarily getting a job, but you're often like learning skills that are going to be the thing you're good at, and you're picking a path. You're often also like much more engaged with your friends in a way where you often have a found family that is almost replacing your family. And you often are going into serious romantic relationships. You can have romance in middle grade, but it's going to be much less serious.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. And I think I've really noticed that in both middle grade and YA books, but also in real life. So that's just another reason why I love going into stories and reading them, because they're so closely tied to real life, which, like, it's really special to me and a lot of other readers, because books are supposed to be an escape, and kind of reading along with characters that are going through the same experiences as you. Well, not necessarily the exact same. Some of them might be going to a magic school and fighting demons, but it's got the same feelings, and that's really important to us as readers. So.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about that when people talk about, for instance, Book of the Air. Like, we have in it a character who is kind of an assassin, kind of a like, she is certainly engaged in some brutal stuff. Like, she is engaged. She's also poisoning herself a little bit. She's doing Mithridism, so she can withstand poison, and all this stuff is really outside of, I hope, most people's common experience. But metaphorically,
Yeah.
we absolutely understand it. Like metaphorically, we know what it's like to take big chances. We know what it's like to train really hard for something in a way that feels like it's, taking you outside of your regular life, or, feels where you're uncomfortable. Like, I think that what fantasy can do is it can talk about our own experiences slant, so
Yeah.
we can get at different aspects of them.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I really noticed that in your YA and fantasy and also middle grade fantasy. And now I know you've written many, many, many books, but out of all of your stories, is there one that holds an extremely special place in your heart, and for what reason?
I mean, I think it's always going to be my first book. So my
Mhm.
first book was Tide, a Modern Fairy Tale, and I didn't know how to write a book. When I started it, I have a lot of drafts of it that are a bunch of elves sitting around drinking coffee, experiencing ennui. I had no idea how to like get them up and go on an adventure. I had early drafts where I thought, wouldn't it be great if there was like a call to a quest, but then they just didn't go? Like, wouldn't that be really cool and revolutionary? No, it's terrible, terrible. But I didn't know. Like, I was
Yeah.
really feeling my way through story, and I remember getting to the end of the last draft, because I would like write forward and go back and delete it, and then go back and write again and then delete it. And I got to the end and thought, this feels like the ending of a book. I think this is a book. Um, and I don't think anything was ever that hard again. But it's such a special place in my heart because, it meant so much to me to actually like finish it and make it the book I wanted it to be.
Mhm. And that's a wonderful answer because, the first book is really what leads to, the 20, 30, or maybe just another book that you're going to write in the future. And it's got to hold like some special place in your heart. It's where it all started.
And to me, like I thought my goal was to like write a book and get it published.
Hmm.
And truly I was like, wait, more books? I guess I
Yeah.
could. But like it didn't occur. It seemed like such a big goal.
Hmm.
I like really was stunned at the thought of like, wait, I have to do that again. If I want to keep doing this, I guess I do.
Yeah. You got to keep on going, but it gets easier, I guess.
It definitely gets easier. I think you wind up challenging yourself in new ways.
Hmm.
And I think every book is hard. But I think even just knowing how you got through the last one, or that you got through the last one, right, is a huge boon to believing you could get through the next one.
Hmm. That is such a great answer. And a fun fact for those of you listening or watching. So I had the honor of actually meeting Holly in person back in March when we were both at the Teen Author Boot Camp in Provo, Utah. I was a person in the background listening, and she was the one who had the awesome keynote presentation. And she was also featured on an author question answer panel with Nick Brooks. So I'm just curious to know how you got involved with Teen Author Bootcamp in the first place, and had you participated in any previous Teen Author Bootcamp events prior to the 2023 event?
So I got involved basically just by being asked. And I love doing writing education
Mhm.
stuff. I had never done Teen Author Bootcamp before, but I have done. Clarion did a teen author kind of thing for a while that I did. Alpha has a great program that I've taught at. There's a bunch of programs specifically for teenagers. UMass has one close by here, and I've done a bunch of those. So
Mhm.
not this, but it is something I really care a lot about. When I was between eighth grade and ninth grade, I spent a summer at Rutgers at a writing camp, and it really like it changed my life. Like it fully changed the person I wanted to be, the person I thought I could be. It made such a difference for me, a kid who didn't know a lot of people who were writers or creative people. um, Outside, my mom was a painter, but like I didn't know a lot of people who were really passionate about writing, who were passionate about like, science fiction and fantasy even. And so, I just think of that as being the thing that made me want to go to college and like made me not wind up in some bad situations that other people I knew did get into. And I always want to participate in those kinds of things.
Well, that is so sweet. Such a sweet answer. And these events like Teen Author Boot Camp, they're not just learning opportunities for the aspiring authors who are attending, but it's also a memory that they'll never forget and will stay with them, as you said. So it was so wonderful to meet you, and also to all the kids. I heard all of them saying, like, Holly Black is absolutely amazing.
Oh, I really loved being there. I loved doing it. I went in and did some of the workshops. They were really
Yeah,
fun. It really is such a good event. Have you been going now for a while?
that was my first year, and I went I went there for the gala, and then I was asked, "Do you want to come and watch Teen Out the Boot Camp as well?" And I learned so much about writing and about all the different genres that I hope to one day write in, like from that event.
The workshop they did on invented languages,
Mm,
really amazing.
it really was. And if any of you are teen aspiring writers in the West Coast or even East Coast, you should definitely check out Teen Out the Boot Camp. It's in Provo, Utah, and it is such a wonderful event. And
Really
now
was.
back to Holly Black. So let's talk a bit about the Spiderwick Chronicles, which was actually turned into a Disney Plus original series. And you co-wrote this horror mystery with some added fantasy middle grade series. It's kind of a mouthful, but that's all the genres that are in it. It was published in 2002. It's actually your second book that you ever wrote. I mean, you probably wrote a lot more books, but the second book that you published. So the
It,
story has now been turned into a Disney Plus series and even a video game for Xbox 360 players. So first, can you give us a brief summary of the story with no spoilers, of course, and what was it like to co-write such a fantastical tale?
so I had been working on Tide,
Mm-hmm.
and Tony and I were really good friends. He had this idea for a field guide to fairies, and I really, really wanted him to do it. And so I, said to him, look, I will write all the little descriptions of the creatures, no problem. And we had at that point the same editor.
Mm-hmm.
And so our editor talked to us about, like, well, could you tell more of the story of the field guide? And we were like, I guess, because we really thought the project was this big field guide.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were like, sure, I guess we could tell some stories. Why not? And so Tony and I went off, and like we had spent a lot of time talking about stories anyway. And so it was really pretty fun to do. Sat down and like figured out what the story could be. And then I went off and wrote, and he went off and drew. And he would send me stuff, and I would send him stuff. And, he would kind of tell me stuff that he would like to have happen so he could draw it. And sometimes he would draw little creatures and be like, can you find a way to put this in? And we would just go back and forth like that. So it was a really fun collaborative project, and just a joy to do. And it has been very surprising how much it has like stayed in the public consciousness, how much, people, it came out at a good time. It came out like around when Harry Potter was coming out, and there were a lot of younger siblings for whom this was like a gateway into fantasy. And like it means so much to me that there are so many kids for whom this was the first book they read themselves.
That is so
Um,
sweet.
really good. It's just nice. And it like encapsulates so much of stuff that Tony and I really loved.
Mhm. Well, the Spiderwick Chronicles, I mean, I wish that it was the first book that I read because I think that it's an incredible gateway to the world of fairies and magic, and a field guide would also be extremely cool to read. And But I'm
Feel
glad
good.
that you added some, story elements as well with our three main characters. And it's about 100-page read, but I found myself a bit I was at the edge of my seat the entire story, and there's so much suspense and a bit of freakiness as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's the story of these three kids. They find a field guide to fairies that their great uncle Arthur Spiderwick created, and they slowly realize that all that stuff is real, and that many creatures want to get the field guide for their own reasons, either to keep it from humans or to use it against, because it contains a lot of information they don't necessarily know about one another.
Yeah, and the field guide, I really want a field guide to fairies. That'd be, you know,
It's out there. Tony did his field guide. You can, it
oh
is
really?
quickly, like, we actually did finish the field guide.
Oh
It is,
wow.
it's just that to no one is that the project. Everyone thinks, oh yeah, you made the side project, but we really did make the field.
Oh my God, I need to read that. I'm gonna tell my mom right away after this interview that we need to order
Excellent. I
it.
will send you one. How about that? I will
Oh, that would
send
be
you a field
awesome.
guide.
Okay. And now my next question for you is, well, many of your young adult stories are all about the world of fairies. So, what about the lore behind these creatures keeps you writing about them and intrigued and interested about their backstories?
So one of the things that I really love about fairies is that, when you think about a werewolf or a vampire or so many other creatures, they were human,
Hmm.
right? Or they are human in some sense, but fairies were never human. They are not us. And they have a different moral system.
Hmm.
And that really fascinates me. It also fascinates me that they are an ecosystem, right? They are not one kind of creature. They're not the trooping gentry. They're not trolls. They're all like, they're trolls, they're ogres, they're nixies, they're shagfulls, they're kelpies, they're, pixies, they're um, many other things that will-o'-the-wisps. Like, there's just so many
Hmm.
creatures within the umbrella of fairy, and so much folklore to draw on. And so I really love that. And then I think the thing that I come back to a lot is sort of the Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market view of fairies. That, you know, in that poem, there's this fruit, and if you eat it, you crave it forever. You crave it so much that mortal food is dust and ashes in your mouth, right? You will wither away for want of this fruit. And like, to me, that encapsulates fairy. Like, fairy is ruinous beauty. It's the thing you absolutely shouldn't go toward, and yet is so tempting.
That is such a great way to put it. Wow. I mean, I know that I couldn't say it better myself. And I mean, of course you could say it better than me because you encapsulate the world of fairies in your stories. And also, just for everybody listening who are unaware, the world of fairies, faeries, is not like the regular tooth fairy that might be um in like it encapsulates. So the world of fairies is all these different mythologies, all these different creatures. It's not just a tooth fairy or a Tinkerbell. It's everything almost in the magical world, and it I really really hope that fairies are out there because that would be so cool to just stumble upon one, and then I'd probably run away because
Very wise.
yeah, that's probably the wisest thing to do because they are a lot stronger and a lot quicker and a lot scarier than they may appear.
Tony and I used to bring around this red book,
Mhm.
uh, and it was blank. It started out blank book, and we would ask people if they had ever had experiences with fairies and to write them
Oh,
down in the book. And we have been like completely surprised by how many people would come up and write about their experiences, the thing they saw, kids and adults. And a lot of times, they're very much like folklore around fairies. Like, we think of like I think of fairy tales as being these complete stories,
Mhm.
but folklore often has the aspect of a ghost story where you'll only have part of it. It's this moment when the supernatural bumps up against the regular world and then sort of comes away with or without consequences. And so people would write about, like, I looked out my window and there was what I thought was a bird's nest, but there was a glow within it.
Mm.
Or like I was getting in bed and I saw a little man run across my room and disappear into like a vent. And there are all these like weird moments. And I really love looking through the book. And some of them are sweet and some of them are a little creepy. And yeah, just
Yeah.
like so affirming that that there's more out there in the world than we may know.
Well, I hope so. And also, maybe don't. Um, but yeah, carry your that actually sounds like a super fabulous and fun idea to carry around that red book and have all these people write down their stories, and then maybe that's inspiration for some of yours.
Maybe.
So my next question for you is, well, for starters, I have to say all of your stories have such amazing and eye-catching art, from your
Mm.
book covers to the magical illustrations inside and outside of the story. It's like a spell is cast upon you, and I'm just looking at them right here just to take it in. Wowzers. So, how do you go about finding cover artists and interior illustrators for your stories? Because you have the world of fairies inside of it, and people might not necessarily, not all artists might know about that world.
So, first of all, worth saying that authors do not necessarily get a say in their covers.
Mm,
It is, it is something that over time, uh, and you can get more of a say, but
yeah.
it's very rare to have approval. I don't have approval over my covers, although I do have I do now have like contractual consultation.
Mm, mhm.
I will say also that no publisher wants you to hate your cover, and that is not at all, what I'm trying to say, that they would,
Yeah.
just dump some cover on you, but that it is a complicated situation, and mostly you will not be the person making a decision about your cover. Um, and I have been very lucky, although I have had some covers that people may not like as much as others. But obviously, working with Tony, I didn't have to worry about anything.
That's true.
He's amazing, and he did, all of the covers for, his and our books. And that was really wonderful. I think, in general, and Rovina, when I did King of Elfhame, like, because she was doing all of the interior art, she also did the cover, and working with her on that was just an incredible experience. She's amazing. um but I have been really, really lucky with other covers. I think in particular the Pearl Prince cover is just such
Mm,
a beautiful cover. And I remember when I saw it just being like, oh, that's the cover. And I think that's the feeling you want to get when you see your cover. You want to have an emotional response. Like, I don't think that there's any way when it doesn't quite work for you, like often there's a desire to be like, but maybe if it was like a little bit different. But I think it really is about, like, it needs to have that impact
mhm.
before it can be tweaked.
Definitely. That is a great answer. And I had no I mean, I knew that some authors don't really have a huge have a say at all or a huge say, even if they have a little bit. And but I still it's still hard to grasp that all these beautiful covers, it's not necessarily the author who kind of hires somebody to do the covers and gives them like a full, hey, this is what everything should look like. It's kind of how the illustrators picture the characters and the story.
Well, okay, so usually this is how it's going to generally work, right? Say
Okay.
you're the author, you've sold your book, you send your editor some pictures, and maybe they're pictures of other covers that you really
Mhm.
like,
Okay.
maybe they're images, maybe you actually have like an illustrator in mind, and you say, here's all this stuff, editor, The editor then makes a brief for the art director.
All right.
They can include some of your pictures. They can include none of your pictures. You will never know. This is an internal document, right? That
Yeah.
goes to the art director.
Mhm.
Then the art director looks at all of this. They can respond like, great. They can respond like, nope. And then they can reach out to, and then they reach out to somebody in their stable of artists, either in-house or out of house, and send them, again, some kind of brief. But you can see how even in the best intentions, this can be a little bit of a game of telephone,
Yeah.
right? And so that artist may get some of the book, maybe sent some of the book, maybe sent none of the book,
Oh.
maybe sent a brief description of the book, maybe sent a brief description of the book that's really misleading.
Yeah.
And then kind of what you want. And so you really wind up with a wide variety of responses based on who everybody is, how everybody sees this, where the market is, because you may, as an author, be like, I really love this kind of particular design. And the art director may say, that particular design is really old fashioned. And like, that's not where we are now as a market.
Mhm.
We need to go this way. And like, they may be totally right. I had an idea for the cover of Pearl Prince to put a throne on it. It looked terrible. Their idea was better. Like, I am not saying in any way that that we as authors are always right.
Mhm. And I I mean, I'm not gonna be I should also, I mean, I know some authors are, some of their art is, I've had one person come on and say that their art looks like chicken scratch, so they did not want any illustrate, like, they would not give any advice to the illustrators. They just said, "You do you," you know?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, and I think most of us have a sense of aesthetic. I think the thing that
yeah.
you want in a cover, most of all, beyond everything else, you want the cover to represent what's inside. And I think when I have gotten covers that I don't like, it isn't even just a question of like, is this aesthetically beautiful, not aesthetically beautiful? It's a question of when somebody picks this up, are they going to get the book they think?
That's a good point. Yeah. So, my next question for you is one that I've always been a bit curious about because you published your first book in 2002. Now, this statistic might make you feel old, but that was over 21 years ago.
It sure was.
So a lot has changed in the book world since then, and in the world as a whole. So that probably includes the publishing industry as well. So
Very much.
what are some major changes that you've seen in the industry since you first started out?
So I think the biggest one is the rise of YA. When I
So,
sold my first book, YA was not really a big genre. You could kind of send out, I didn't have an agent. You didn't need an agent in kids publishing because it just was a much smaller, much it just wasn't as big business. There was less money going around. So I remember going to the SCBWI conference between the publication of Tithe and the publication of Spiderwick. So um, Tithe was like fall 2002, and then Spiderwick was like spring, summer 2003. And so between the two of those, there was like a winter conference. And I guess everybody had been told to like network all the time. And so I was in the line for the ladies' bathroom. The lady in front of me turned around and she said, "What do you write?" And I said, "Oh, YA." And she turned around and talked to somebody else because YA was so like nobody, there was no money in it. It was all picture
yeah.
books and middle grade. And then one of the big things that happened was that Barnes and Noble moved the YA section outside of kids.
Oh
So
yeah.
like, like if you go into Barnes and Noble, there's like kind of, sometimes there's like kind of bears or whatever,
Yeah.
like a barrier, right? And no teenager wants to go through the bear barrier, right, to get a book.
Mhm.
And so moving it right outside of that made it discoverable to teens and also adults. And probably the first book that changed, like that really changed the game for YA was Gossip Girl.
Really?
Yeah, that was the book that adults came through and were buying in
My mom
YA.
loves the show.
It was a big, like it was a just huge business all of a
Mhm.
sudden for YA. And then, the next, huge change was in 2005 with Twilight,
Mhm.
which brought just a huge number of readers again to the YA section. And I would say that even though it's not YA, the thing that Harry Potter did was allow for much longer books.
Mhm.
Like before that, you had somebody like Tammy Pierce who was writing quartets, and she was writing quartets because there was a real firm word count. Like people didn't think that teenagers wanted 100,000 word books.
And then Harry Potter comes along and it's 500 or more pages.
Right, for younger kids than
Yeah.
YA. So, all of a sudden you had this big boom of like, okay, how about some big books?
Yeah. And I love your point about how teenagers don't want to go through the bear barriers because at my Barnes and Noble, there's all these characters from picture books and fairy tales all
Right.
along the walls. And then I mean at the moment I may still go in there, but if I'm a teenager, I would go like no. So that's definitely a great point that you brought to the table because now YA are in its own section and it's not as bright and happy cheery, but I mean the books are still awesome.
Right, it's right in the and so it's very discoverable by teenagers and adults, which
Yeah.
also changed the industry also in
Mhm.
complicated ways, and ways that I think YA is still trying to figure out what to do with, because a lot of adults read YA. And yay, I mean, as a YA reader, please come read my books, stay with me. But it also means like people are still trying to figure out like who are these books exactly for? What is YA? It's definitely shifted in terms of age upward.
Mhm. So what is your definition of YA? Like what is the age range? Like or what actually since adults read it, when does it start? Like at what age?
And I think that it's so dependent on every reader, right?
Mhm. That's a
Um, I think, and it depends on the kind of YA too. Like you have some YA that is meant to be younger and is, more accessible for a younger reader, and then you have some YA that's more inaccessible. But I mean, I when I was a kid, I read YA, but there wasn't very much of it, and so I read adult books from probably the time I was in, seventh and eighth grade, like along the same lines, and you just ran into some stuff and some
Yeah.
stuff happened in those books, and you made of it what you would. um in some cases I think you just read past it, like I don't know what's going on here, but whatever.
Mhm.
And in other cases you were like, okay, well I guess I learned a thing.
Yeah.
And I have a tendency to think that kids can read around stuff, and if they're reading YA and they're like, oh, this is a little weird for me, that they can put it down. And
Yeah.
I hope they will.
That's such a great point that you bring up. And I love your answer as well. So
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. And my next question for you is, I mean, you've written many, many, many books about all these different kinds of fairies and fantasy. You've written for Disney, everything kind of. But, you know, even if you write everything, there's still something out there. So, are there any topics or themes that you've not yet included in any of your books that you hope to one day write about?
um So one thing I really at some point would like to do, I think, is so there's a lot of books about werewolves in which the werewolf is somehow equated with like blue collar, like
Yeah.
salt of the earth,
Mm-hmm.
people. And I would really love to write a fancy werewolf. I don't
Mm-hmm.
understand why vampires are constantly aristocrats and werewolves are constantly like lay people. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder, like, what about a werewolf with a castle? A werewolf who is
Yeah.
like, like fancy werewolves. Definitely a thing I would like to do someday. Um, and I would like to write a story about um I'm really fascinated with the person who has like gone into retirement
Mm.
and then must come back out for one more job.
Yeah.
Love that. Would like to write that at some point. Um, I think there's a lot of stories
Mm-hmm.
still I would like to write. Yeah, many things. Those are the two things though that I can like. I often am like, fancy werewolves. I don't know if I'll ever write them, but
Well, folks, look out for some fancy werewolves and some heroes coming out of retirement stories from Holly Black in the near future, or maybe the late future, depending on when she gets around to it. So now it's time for my final question of the interview. The question I have asked every single person I've ever interviewed,
oh my god.
I think, probably. So if you could be or meet any literary character, and you could be or you could meet your favorite author, or it could be your favorite character in a story that you read as an adult or a kid or a teenager or whatever age range. So who would it be and why? You could be them or you could meet them.
Hmm. Okay, so two answers. So one, I would love to meet William Butler Yeats and ask him about the Order of the Golden Dawn.
Mm-hmm. It's a
Get
great answer.
some magical gossip out of him. And then I would like to meet Jen from The Thief, which is Megan Willen Turner's book. I don't know if you've ever read it. I
I have.
highly recommend it. It's
Okay.
so good. It has a big con at its center. He is a delight. And it's the first book of a big series that kind of it starts in middle grade
Mm-hmm.
and goes through YA.
Ooh.
And it's The Thief, Queen of Atolia, King of Atolia, then a couple more that I think ends with the Return of the Thief.
Mhm.
And I'll hang out with Jen and be conned by him.
Well, that is a great answer. And I love stories that that as the characters get older, the stories get for older kids. And I think you can kind of see that in Harry Potter books and how, especially the movies, because they go from pretty cheery to extremely dark. And
It's an
so,
unusual structure. There's not a lot of books that do it.
yeah, a lot of the characters just stay at the same age forever, like a TV show.
Mhm.
I mean, how is Bart Simpson still 10 years old in The Simpsons? I mean, it's been 30 years.
He lives in the eternal now.
Yeah, that's one way to put it, definitely. So those are two great recommendations, and I have to get to reading The Thief.
Brilliant.
So I'll get right to it. And all of you, you need to get right to reading Holly Black's stories because her answers, as you could tell, are absolutely they're thoughtful, they're intriguing, and they're epic, just like her stories. So you can see how those epic stories kind of come to shape because you need to have a pretty cool author to have some pretty cool books. So I know that everyone watching is thrilled that they were able to learn some more about your writing journey, including me. And I cannot wait to discover more of your stories and see what you write next.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for all the hype. So appreciated. Always a delight to talk to you.
Well, it's a delight to talk to you as well. And for those of you watching who want to learn more about Holly, you can follow her on her website, and I'll put that in the description. And you can also follow her on social media. She's extremely active on Instagram And there you can find some really cool pictures, some sneak peeks, and a whole lot more. And also, there's a lot of stuff on Etsy, like kind of pieces created by fans of Holly Black that, like, there's collectible items. You got to check it out. So, it's been a fantastic day here on Each Train Talks. I'm sorry it has to end. And if you enjoyed learning about Holly as much as I did and want to watch more future interviews, be sure to check out more of the interviews on Each Train Talks. And also, Holly has, you can just look it up online. There's some more interviews with Holly Black that you can definitely check out, and you'll learn a lot more about her. So, yeah, stay safe, keep reading. That's the end of this very long extra, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.